Last week in Austin, Texas, a man named Joseph Stack posted a rambling, incoherent, anti-government, anti-IRS screed online. He set his house on fire, and then he flew a small plane into a building that housed IRS offices. Mr. Stack killed himself in the attack, and he killed IRS collections manager Vernon Hunter, a 27-year employee of the Internal Revenue Service and a 20-year veteran of the United States Army who served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. The city of Austin will hold a moment of silence tomorrow in honor of Mr. Hunter and those wounded in the attack. Timothy Geithner has also traveled to Austin to meet with IRS employees who survived the attack. The IRS, of course, is under the jurisdiction of his government department, the Treasury. As the city of Austin and the survivors and the family of the man who was killed all try to come to terms with this inexplicable suicide attack on a government facility, one member of Congress has repeatedly publicly announced that he sympathizes with this act of terrorism. He is Congressman Steve King of Iowa.
He flew himself into an IRS building. Do you think his attack, his terrorist attack, was motivated at all by a lot of the anti-tax rhetoric that's popular in America right now?
I think if we'd abolished the IRS back when I first advocated it, you wouldn't have had a target for his airplane. And I'm still for abolishing the IRS. I mean, it's sad that the incident happened down in Texas, but by the same token, the IRS is an agency that's unnecessary. And when the day comes that is over and we've abolished the IRS, it'll be a happy day for all Americans.
So some of his grievances were legitimate?
I don't know if his grievances were legitimate. I read part of the material. I can tell you that I've been audited by the IRS, and I've had the sense of, why is the IRS in my kitchen?
It'd be a happy day when that guy who just killed a government worker and flew a plane into a government building gets what he wanted. That'll be a happy day. Here was the response to Congressman Steve King's comments from Congressman James Clyburn.
One of our colleagues has now called the act of terrorism a noble act. The fact of the matter is the gentleman that lost his life in that building, Vernon Hunter, was from Orangeburg, South Carolina, that I proudly represent in this body. He spent 2 tours in Vietnam and was about the business of carrying out his duties and responsibilities to this great country of ours. If anybody is a hero, it is this victim. And I find it appalling that a member of this body will call his death a noble happening.
Congressman Steve King still says he is not sorry for his remarks. We contacted his office today. They gave us this statement, quote, "As a founder of a small business who has endured IRS audits, I understand the deep frustration with the IRS. In the early days, my company could not run without me on the job. I once had to shut it down just to be in the room with the IRS. I did not get a fair shake, but I channeled my frustration the American way and ran for office. Americans looking for an outlet for their frustration should join me in calling on Congress to pass a national sales tax and abolish the current federal tax code and the IRS." I don't want to tell Congressman King how to do his job, but when you're asked to respond to a terror attack on your country, even one in which the attacker's target happens to be something you also don't like, I would put to you that the appropriate response is to condemn the act of terrorism and then stop talking for a while, rather than ally yourself with the terrorist and talk about how justified you'd think his actions were. We're joined now by Glenn Greenwald, a contributing writer at Salon.com. Glenn, thank you for your time, and I'm very sorry that American Airlines lost your luggage today.
Thank you, Rachel. That's very consoling.
I generally don't take things that Congressman Steve King says all that seriously, because I think he's sort of a provocateur and is just trying to get on cable. It does seem remarkable to me, though, just in terms of our politics, that a member of Congress can get away with talking about the legitimacy of this type of act against the government and not have caused a firestorm.
Well, when someone commits an act of violence against civilians or non-combatants in pursuit of a political agenda, I think it's important to distinguish between discussions of whether the underlying grievances are valid, which is a legitimate discussion to have, and justifications for the violence itself. I mean, you can have discussions about whether the underlying grievances of, say, Islamic radicals are justifiable, things like the fact that we bomb their countries and invade and occupy them, overthrow their governments, prop up tyrannies, without without justifying terrorism as long as you say that the act of terrorism and violence itself is illegitimate. But what the right tends to do in this country, and this is true historically, at least when they're out of power, when they're in power, they expand government power wildly. But when they're out of power, they adopt very extremist anti-government rhetoric that suggests not merely that the government is acting wrongly, but that the government is a legitimate target for attack and should be seen as illegitimate. You saw that several years ago when there was a spate of attacks on judges, and John Cornyn, the senator from Texas, said that judges basically had it coming because of bad decisions that they've made. You saw it in the 1990s when Newt Gingrich, after the Timothy McVeigh attack, said that the fear that Americans have of their government is justifiable, and you see it now with some of the movements on the right talking about the need to replenish the tree of liberty with the blood of patriots. It's very violent anti-government extremism, and what Congressman King said, I think, clearly crosses that line from merely talking about the underlying grievances into endorsing violence itself, and it's very dangerous and should provoke a much stronger reaction.
Glenn, you've written critically and with some detail about whether or not this incident in Austin should be described as terrorism. You just heard me describe it as terrorism. I also described the killing of Dr. George Tiller as terrorism when that happened. And I know there's lots of people who disagree with me on that, so using that sort of name for legitimate reasons. I think it's worth discussing. Do you think that this should be called an act of terrorism? Does it make sense that people are reluctant to call this terrorism?
Well, the problem is that terrorism has really become the most meaningless and therefore the most manipulated word in the American political lexicon. Really what it has come to mean is Muslims who generally are hostile to or dislike the United States. There are actual definitions of terrorism that the United States government has adopted that are very clear. It has nothing to do with who the person is, but what the act is. And the act of terrorism means engaging in violence directed at civilians or non-combatants for the purpose of putting fear into the population or changing behavior in order to achieve political goals. And if you read the manifesto, for lack of a better word, that Joseph Stack left, what it said was, I'm doing this in order to inspire others to give up their bodies in pursuit of these political ideas. I mean, if that's not terrorism, then I don't know what is. And yet we call things terrorism that don't meet that definition, like the Fort Hood attack, which attacked a military base. Everybody called that terrorism because it was a Muslim attacker who said Allah Akbar. But in this case, and in the case of people who stand outside abortion clinics and shoot abortion doctors in order to change abortion laws, clear, definitive acts of terrorism, we're reluctant to call it that because these are Americans, and the premise seems to be that Americans don't commit terrorism, only foreigners do.
Or Americans who are Muslims or have foreign-sounding names.
Exactly.
Glenn Greenwald of Salon.com, as always, clear and uncompromising thinker on these and many issues. Glenn, it's good to have you on the show. Good luck with your luggage.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate it.